Welcome to session 34. In the last session, we briefly reviewed the first three sentences of the opening paragraph in Daoist. In this session, I would like to particularly examine the differences between Confucianism and Taoism. My personal belief, based on my limited reading and exposure, nevertheless, I believe, at least as of today, I believe Confucianism deal with a lot of details on the tactical level, with lots of, techniques and tools provided from the Confucianism system or the Confucianism teachings. And of course, that was the core part of the education in the prep schools for the royal court official credential exams for almost 1,000 years, right? Whereas the Taoism teaching deal with more on the strategic level and to observe the problems and to look for the solutions rather in seemingly appear to be a disengaging approach. And I would like to share with you here what I think. I don't believe Taoist actors like, just hands off completely and totally disregard, turn a blind eye. No. What I believe is in the classical Chinese, we always, hear about two Chinese characters, yin, yin. So if I translate that directly into English, I would use the word adaptive. So adaptive approach. So that for the Taoists to observe the problems and then to come up with the the resolutions, all end up in the adaptive approaches. So first of all, if you observe from an angle that is very, tactical, very engaging in the particular matters, but focus on the surface, not the root cause. And you don't have the forward vision to stay at least 3 steps ahead, then you are constantly responding to the problems as they appear, as they come, right? So for me, that is more responsive, at the technical and tactic level, as versus otherwise, you take 3 steps back, and then you climb a little higher level, and then you have, a broader view, right? And you're looking at the bigger picture. And then basically, here's the key part. For Taoists, you review the history and forecast the future from knowing the history. So what does that require? That requires what today we call, in the term, historical trend. So everything happened before, and it will happen again. So when you see things evolving, right, in a pattern, that becomes a trend. So this is what a Taoist would need to do. And in Chinese, there are 4 characters, which is called 顺势而为. So what is 势 here? 顺势 meaning you just follow that 是 and take your actions or inactions. So 是, the Chinese character, or Japanese call it kanji, is the trend. So you follow the trend. So for anyone, if you take your action against the evolving trend, it's gonna be way more difficult, a lot more challenge for you to have, to handle, to actually arrive at the end result that you projected and hopefully engineered for, right? I'll give you an example. Today, the whole world, popularism is basically the trend, which is said it, somewhat, inclining towards the right wing. And there, because of that, along with other situations, in particular, let's say in the United States, so we have the president that we have today, right? Who in the election coming up, is there going to be any change? We don't know as far as the individual who's going to. Would it be the same occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, as the current sitting president, or is it going to be somebody else? We don't know, but still, the general trend, the political trend is already there, identified. So whoever is going to sit in that White House, either the same guy or different, person, their policy against China is going to continue. Why? Because, hey, that would be popular, right, in today's American politics. So it doesn't really matter what the Chinese do or not to do. Not really. The Americans had an enemy, which was Soviet Union, and then Russia, of course, I guess inherited the status of the enemy of the U.S., which, I guess fortunate for the Russians, today the Chinese are replacing them and becoming the number one enemy of the Americans. Not really the day-to-day American people, but not necessarily. But hey, when the government there, they analyze all the time. They find this as trend, make them more popular. And of course, the American media, what they do help to not necessarily form, but push the trend too. So there goes the Chinese foreign policy, if they have one. I guess it's totally beyond me. I don't see the Chinese policy, the foreign policy actually, I guess, working. And it probably may not make too much difference. Of course, it should, but hey, that's the general trend, right? And then you look at the Europe, same thing, right? So with this, populism, excuse me, up and rise, continue to rise, the political trend there changed too. It does, swing a little bit towards, or at least more towards the right wing. And then South America, basically throughout the world, right? It's just time for change. So if you have your political agenda, you better, get with the trend, follow the trend. But if you want to do something totally against the current trend, like I said, it will be way more difficult rather than, follow the trend and then, form your strategy there. So that's about politics. And of course, most of us, we're not in politics, but still the same thing. If you were thinking about a reform for the business practice at a, bigger company, you need to identify the trend and see if there's a way to form a new trend, not too much challenge there, but basically to have the current trend, somehow, I guess, turned into the next trend, and hopefully can ride that wagon and get on the wagon that basically you engineered. Again, this is 顺势而为, and this 势 right here, this very key word or the character, is trend. So for Daoists to solve any problems, you first identify the trend, and then adaptive approach basically take over. And then you form your strategies. The strategies will be way more important than the techniques, okay? And so this is why I believe if you are at the point you need some wisdom to help you to solve the bigger problems, I think the Taoist adaptive approach often should help. Okay, and so here comes the I guess the third sentence we just talked about, which is basically there are things, basically from unknown to known. There are at least two options or optional path. For certain things we don't need or even want to know the truth that scientifically defined, but for other things we actually do need, and we do have the measurements to observe the changes over the particular course, so that what we can arrive at a historical trend, so that we can use our adaptive approach to solve whatever the problem we observed the root cause was. And so I think that is very, very important core part of Taoism, right? So this is boiling down to the cognition, right? So how do you observe the mother nature and all the problems that coming your way in your lifetime? You just continually experience one right after another. You can get stuck with all those and get so stressed out, or you can take a more I guess somewhat more disengaging stance, knowing these problems are almost inevitable as part of your life, and your life becomes almost between the solutions or no solutions of one problem after another. Basically just live through the problems one after another until the last day of your life, right? So you can be solving the problem while still maintain your happiness, your good mood, or you can be all stressed out, just get exhausted between the solutions or solution findings, for all those problems, basically just all around you, and become your daily life. Of course, you have problems at home, you have problems at work, and theoretically, every problem, for every problem, there's a solution, at least one, and there are probably a whole bunch, as options. It's just a matter of your choices. But if your solutions are basically reactive, now that we're on this subject, let's compare between the Western school of medicine and the traditional Chinese school of herb medicine. The contemporary Western school of medicine look at the problems, the medical problems, which is basically surface as the clinical symptoms, right? So prescription, supposedly quote unquote, cure the problem and created the side effects along the way. So while the old problem somehow somewhat got under control, the new problems were created. 30, 40 years later, the lab discoveries, concluded, yeah, those side effects, we didn't know back then, did we? Yeah, so bad, too bad. And so the new drug engineered supposedly, better to replace this one. And then who knows, the new drug may or may not have even more side effects, right? And that's why supposedly we have the four, clinical trial period as required by FDA and the equivalents of the European counterparts in Europe and of course in China. Uh, does that really do a whole lot? Well, because the whole approach was basically to go after the quote unquote clinical symptoms, which is pretty much what appeared on the surface. But what's the root cause? That's what's dealt with by the Chinese traditional herb medicine, which is very customized to each individual patient for, given the conditions of a patient, the family history of a patient, all the prescriptions was very individualized. One prescription certainly, cannot be applied to any other patients of the exactly same clinically diagnosed symptoms. No. Why? Because some patients are weaker than others. So even though they're diagnosed for exactly the same problem, the treatment cannot be the same. And the same herb medicine, exactly the same, but they were, out of different part of the world. Let's say north part of China versus south part of China. Exactly the same plants. Some are more mild than others. So those weaker condition of patients, they are prescribed with the same herb plant, but from different part of China, right? So that is how individualized it is, or it was, not anymore in China. Now they just make the Chinese herb medicine the same way the Western medicine is basically a chemical compound, as analyzed. But the point over here is if we observe, right, the problems at a more strategic level, but we actually go deeper and go further away, in reference of the entire historical trend, our approach will be far more advanced here. So while it's seemingly on the surface, the Taoist approach is more disengaging, but actually, instead of responsive, it is actually proactive, right? And that's why the Chinese herb medicine started from, preventive approaches, all these exercises that, enable the natural circulation of your positive energy inside your body. And by the way, we already mentioned, the whole Chinese herb medicine is completely, entirely, 100% Taoism teaching, prove or oriented. And so with that, the Chinese herb medicine actually, do a lot more or cover a lot more ground very proactively to deal all the way not only to the root cause, but to prevent the root cause from, happening again. So that is what we're talking about. It does appear to be disengaging compared to the Confucianism approach, but it is actually far more effective in the long run, right? So this is, what I want to talk about in this session. And until next session, ciao.